Welcome to our new special, Ask DW, your chance to have your questions answered by our correspondents and experts. Tonight, Donald Trump's tariffs.
Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. That's tariff.
We all saw it last night. The U.S. president has unveiled sweeping new taxes on all imports, with America's traditional allies in Europe and Asia among the hardest hit. Will Trump's tariffs trigger a chain reaction of retaliation, tit-for-tat tariffs? And what does it mean for stocks and perhaps for your retirement? Your questions answered tonight in Ask DW. So if you are streaming us on YouTube, send us your questions in the chat section. And there's a lot to talk about tonight. I'm Brent Goff. It's good to have you with us, and it's great to have tonight's panel of experts here. Here at the big table with me is my colleague Stephen Beardsley from DW Business News. Stephen, it's good to see you. He's been reporting all day on the economic fallout from Trump's tariffs. And over in Brussels, we have my colleague, our correspondent, Christine Munwa. She'll be able to talk about the impact on the European Union. Christine, it's good to see you. And I understand we do have our guest now from Washington. We are thrilled to have Christine Bazina. There she is. Christine, it's good to see you. She's an expert in security and geopolitics at the German Marshall Fund in Washington. It's good to see you all. Well, welcome to you all. Looking forward to bringing you together with our viewer questions. We're going to get to those questions in just a moment. But first, let's rewind to last night and President Trump's announcement at the White House.
April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. We're going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that.
Well, reaction was fast and furious. The head of the European Union didn't even wait for the sun to rise. A 5 a.m. press conference. Good morning to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Take a listen.
I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer.
I think the U.S. president's latest tariff decisions are fundamentally wrong. This is an attack on a trade order that has created prosperity all over the world.
The broad trade restriction measures by the US government will have a big impact, not only on the Japan-US economic relations, but on the global economy as well as the multilateral trade system as a whole.
This neither contributes to the so-called national security or helps US domestic industry. It will only highlight the protectionism and the bullying nature of the US measures.
The ambition of these measures is enormous. The effects on the global economy will be monumental.
All right, send us your questions. We're watching and waiting for them. In the meantime, we're going to talk about what we have seen in the last 24 hours. Stephen, let me go to you. What have we seen since Donald Trump announced these unprecedented tariffs?
I think the first thing we saw was a lot of shock, right? Because we spent the past few weeks trying to figure out exactly what was coming, and there were bets that this was either going to be reciprocal tariffs in the sense of the U.S. raising its tariffs to meet those from other countries that were higher, so an actual rise of the tariff rates, or that we were going to see a universal tariff put on all countries. What we got was this strange creature that's both of them, and 10% baseline tariff, and then the tariff on top of that. It's called reciprocal overall, but ultimately it's sort of a combination of whatever they see the trade barrier being. So,
I mean, but is it really reciprocal? Is it an eye for an eye?
It's not an eye for an eye. If it was an eye for an eye in the EU, for example, the average tariff rate is between 3 and 5%. It's actually not far from the US. And we saw a lot of economists who just in the past few weeks were saying, actually, this is something that the EU and the US can talk about. There's not a whole lot of ground between them, or a whole lot of distance between them, I should say. So if it really is reciprocal, then there's something that we can work on here. What happened now, an effective 20% tariff on the EU, is much more devastating, and that's harder to really get around because it's also very clear this is related to imports and not the actual tariff as a number, but the amount of American goods that countries are importing. And that's hard to force other nations to then import more of your goods. So it's actually a bigger step for a lot of these countries.
We've got one question coming in here from S. Caligram, I think I got that right, asking $2 trillion US was lost from the market in one day due to the tariffs. How do prospects look for 1 week from now, and will the market continue to bleed out while countries retaliate?
It's hard to say. I mean, the market's obviously afraid. So the market reacts because it sees the prospects coming for businesses. It believes this is going to be worse than they had already priced in the weeks before. Now, we saw markets falling in the weeks and days before, and then right in the moment before it was announced, they sort of came up, as some people thought, you know what, everyone's overestimating, we're going to buy the dip, and maybe it'll pay off. And then immediately futures went down because it was actually worse than everyone expected. So we're going to have to wait and see if this is considered an overreaction or if it's going to get worse as the prospects of a recession grow. That's part of the fear here as well, that there's going to be such a reduction of economic activity in the U.S., the recession is in play. And that's going to be the big fear for a lot of businesses, as well as, frankly, the bottom line fears that they're facing right now.
Christine, we've got a question for you. One of our viewers, Moon, asks, is this a huge opportunity for Europe to regain power, develop new technologies, and strengthen trade with other nations? Can this realistically be done? What do you say, Christine?
Well, Moon, I think that's a fantastic question. And I just want to start out by highlighting that, you know, the EU and the US, I mean, we're talking about a trade relationship that is the largest in the world, right? So the US is the EU's largest trading partner, and it goes the same in the other direction. So make no mistake that through this trading relationship, millions of jobs have been created, opportunities, companies built. So this is a very important trading relationship that isn't simply going to be replaced, certainly not overnight. But even if you look to other trade agreements, and we've seen the European Union go out into the world. Recently, you might have heard, Moon, about the Mercosur agreement. That is the European Union and countries in Latin America. This has taken a very long time, almost 15 years to get into that trade agreement. And even then, you still have some member states who have concerns. But I just also want to pick up on the point that Stephen sort of left off on. You know, there was so much momentum here in Europe, right, on the back of all this increased defense spending, the new stimulus that was being announced in Germany, the change in the constitution allowing for more borrowing, etc., relaxation of deficit rules here. So there was a lot of optimism. The skies were clearing, so to say. And there is the sense now that a shadow has been cast all over that, at least in the short term, because of these tariffs. So, you know, things are different now, and you are hearing people say the transatlantic relationship has changed, and it's not just about defense and security, which we've been focusing on for the last few weeks, but this trade relationship that is, some would call the most important in the world, has been upended. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, saying that what the US has done is brutal, it's unfounded, and a shock for allies here.
Let's cross the Atlantic. Our guest who is on the other side of the big pond. Let's go over to Christina Brzezina with the German Marshall Fund. Christina, I want to ask you, what does these trade tariffs, what do they look like from where you're sitting? I mean, we've been told by the U.S. president that this is the start of a golden age for America.
Well, if the U.S. markets are any indication about what the feelings are about tariffs, then these aren't good. And there is worry about the long-term and medium-term impacts of these tariffs. The hope, and what President Trump has said today, is that the operation is over, meaning comparing this to surgery, and then recovery can start. But if the recovery that he wants is a return of American manufacturing, the revival of Main Street, not Wall Street, then these are messages we hear frequently from Trump and from Vance and others in the administration, That is not a quick process. The loss of retirement income, the loss of savings, the loss of investments is something that is going to be felt because of the market turbulence by consumers in the US immediately. And there's also the question of what is going to be the purchasing power of Americans. And for a president who was elected largely around kitchen table issues, so the ability to purchase groceries, the price of eggs, the price of milk, this is not going to help the ability of Americans to purchase cars or refrigerators or add a wing to their house or even just make basic expenses. And this causes a lot of worry. This is why, as the speaker at the table just said, there is a fear of recession, a fear of contraction, because it is not clear what the big impacts will be, except to say that the short term is going to be painful. And as a result, Congress seems to be very upset today.
And let me ask you, Christine, since you're in Washington, we've got a question coming to us again from Squally Graham asking, why is Russia exempt from the tariff list? Do we know?
The official answers seem to be that Russia already is being hurt because of the sanctions, and therefore it is not part of this. And yet this has a bit of a question mark for me over it. There are a lot of places that don't trade with the US that were smacked down with sanctions. There's a lot of amusement over small islands in the Pacific, some uninhabited, that have very high tariff rates that have been waved through. And yet Russia, which is very much top of mind on foreign policy issues, somehow squeaks through. And today also we have senior officials on the economic side from Russia here in Washington. And so it seems very possible, and of course this is entirely speculative, but that Russia was given a better deal because of the other priorities that Trump has with Russia, namely ceasefire, than other countries which are not top of mind on this major issue. And it really seems to be an exceptional position that Russia is in. Again, this is speculative. The official word is because they have sanctions as it is, but it does look funny.
And Stephen, what about the situation for U.S. consumers moving forward? I'm just wondering, if goods are going to increase in price, should people be going out and on a shopping spree all of April, all of May, buying everything that is imported while it's still affordable, and then come, let's say, June or this summer, you're going to see prices go through the roof, and then you're going to see retail sales just go into the basement?
Yeah, Brent, given how turbulent the past few months have been and the shifts in policy that we've seen, I wouldn't suggest that at all. We don't know what's coming next. And for consumers, the one thing that we can imagine is that it's going to be a really rough time coming up. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation in the U.S., which analyzes a lot of these issues, the figure that they're giving is they're saying it's a tax increase, an average tax increase of more than $2,100 per U.S. household in 2025 if all these tariffs go into place, if they stay there. So it's going to be a considerable sum for a lot of people.
So, but how is the president? How is he explaining that then to voters?
He doesn't have to right now. He doesn't have to right now. He's going to have to, right? And this is part of the mystery of what's happening, is the idea of trying to this idea of first the pain and then the gain, right? And this is what everyone's saying, and the talking point that keeps being repeated is this is just some pain that everyone has to go through. And obviously the suggestion is that things are going to change as there's some sort of caving in, but this also illustrates the kind of contradictions within his own policy, because tariffs are supposed to, one, bring people to the negotiation table. They're supposed to also raise money, and then they're also supposed to return manufacturing. Those things don't all work together. So what is it going to be? So if he wants to return manufacturing by his telling, then in theory, all these tariffs should stay in place, right? But if he wants to raise money, the same thing. But if he wants to bring them to the negotiating table and to ease this burden on consumers, and not just consumers, but on businesses that rely on inputs to create other things, to manufacture other things. There is a lot of manufacturing in the U.S. Let's keep that in mind. It's at a high level, and it requires inputs at a lower price from other nations. That's the way it's been built. So if he wants that to happen, then he's going to have to negotiate. So again, all of these things don't really fit.
I've got one question coming in from Gurga Nation. I'm going to give this one to you, Stephen. Do you think U.S. consumers will realize that this is simply a massive tax increase on them? And do you expect this realization to result in a massive retaliation in the midterms? I mean, that's the thing we're looking at next, right?
Yeah, again, it's too early to say. It definitely seems that way, given what we're seeing with the stock markets. The Tax Foundation, which I earlier cited, they also said this is the biggest tax increase since 1982. That was aimed at reducing a budget deficit passed by Congress, we should mention. This is all executive order. That's another point worth noting here.
Yeah. Christine in Washington, let me ask you, is this tariff increase, is this the answer to what we've seen 40, 50 years of deindustrialization in the United States? Does President Trump think that he's going to undo 4 or 5 decades of economic course that we've all lived through?
This is a dramatic measure that seeks to address that pain, that hurt in the United States. Whether he's going to be successful at this, I think, is a very open question. It's a very big bet, and it could have dramatic political ramifications. It absolutely is true that the quality of life in many parts of the United States has fallen significantly, looking at since the end of the Cold War. The closing of factories, deindustrialization, the loss of a lot of manual labor, skilled labor as well. This has been very painful, and this has led to the kind of disenchantment with the world that brought Donald Trump back into office, a sense that he was willing to make big bets and to shake up the system so that it wasn't just about entitled elites and Wall Street executives who were gaining while big portions of the country were hurting. The question now is, how much do those who rely on imports right now, having small businesses, how much do they gain in the short term and the medium term? And how much are they actually hurt? And some of his dramatic steps and those of DOGE, for example, and a lot of the budget cuts and reductions of staffing have wound up hurting a lot of the people who voted for Trump. And so do they have the amount of savings or patience to wait for a manufacturing return, or will they simply feel that this also hurts them today without their having a pillow or savings account to rely on to wait for a return of a golden era?
Well, Christy, what do you think the Trump's attitude is, or the president's attitude is, towards what we're seeing on the stock markets today? I mean, you've seen these dramatic reactions, particularly in the United States. Stocks, tech stocks, just really being hammered. Is his reaction to that is, so what? You're not the people that voted me into office.
Yes and no. Big business also agrees with deregulation. He doesn't have one particular demographic that he is appealing to, and instead his policies seem to go in a circle, speaking to the various demographics that have voted him in. And sometimes a policy that favors one group or a style that favors one group can alienate another. And he's going to feel stuck right now between the markets, between Wall Street, and between the smaller individuals, the deindustrialized areas that want some benefit. And again, this is going to be a matter of time. Today, as the second day of this new era of tariffs, he still is doubling down on this being a good idea. If there are adjustments, I highly doubt we'll see a big mea culpa. Instead, I think they would be quiet corrections or quiet reductions while still emphasizing that the principle of tariffs and the principle of reviving manufacturing is the right way to go.
Yeah. I mean, we don't usually hear a lot of mea culpas coming from Donald Trump. That's a very good point. Christine, in Brussels, we've got a question from a viewer, Queer Search, saying, I am wondering if people in the EU need to brace for extreme changes in our material living conditions, and to what degree? Are the good fat years over, as they say in German?
Well, I think the concern here is obviously what this is going to do to efforts to boost the European economy. Growth here has been sluggish for a few good years now, and there is this huge effort here in Brussels to make the European economy more competitive in the world. And so all these efforts right now, as I said, these tariffs really cast a shadow on the optimism that was starting to build. And that's optimism that we hadn't had in a while here in Brussels. So in terms of how this will trickle down to everyday life, I think that's not where we're at the moment. I think the concern really is how to make European business more competitive. And this certainly does not help. The fact that doing business with the United States, the European Union's most important trading partner, has now become even more expensive, more costly. So the growth that's needed here, then of course, there will be the repercussions of that, because we're talking about all this increased defense spending that is being seen as a necessary evil, so to say. So this is something that is non-negotiable. So if we are not going to be able to fund this through growth, sacrifices will ultimately then have to be made in terms of how budgets are allocated. And then you're potentially looking at, do governments consider the options of making cuts to social spending so that they're able to fund the defense spending? But the main concern right now is to protect European industry. And by all accounts, the Europeans are gearing up to have to do that. The preferred option will be, of course, talks, negotiations, bilateral talks between Brussels and the Trump administration to avoid escalating trade tensions and ensuring a better environment. So I don't think that the average person on the street in Europe will see their standard of living materially decline, at least not in the short term. But it just means that there is now this ever more difficult outlook for the European economy, and growth is desperately needed at this time.
There's another question coming for you, Christine, in Brussels, from Fibonacci. And Fibonacci is asking, is the Trump administration going to try and single out the countries of the EU in order to negotiate with them individually? Many countries in the EU, they certainly have different interests. I mean, is he going to maybe try to, is it divide and conquer here, or cherry picking? I mean, what's going to happen?
Well, you have to say, I mean, in the run-up to this, you did see this effort of leaders, going to the White House, sending representatives, to speak with the officials in the White House, all on an individual basis. I think people today, like the Italian Prime Minister, will be left with a little bit of egg on her face, because there was the hope that he has some friends here, President Trump that is, and therefore maybe these countries will be spared. But that doesn't appear to be the case. And I think what last night's announcement will do is really send a sense in the European Union that we, as individual countries, we certainly can't go at it alone, that it is better to come together as a group. And so you'll find a lot of capitals today have signaled that they will be engaging with the Commission, that is the Trade Commissioner. And I think there is interest in negotiating as a bloc. Certainly there is an advantage in that sense if everybody comes together, as opposed to, countries going at it alone with the US administration. So this is one of those rare moments where we'll probably have that unity that is often not always the case in the European Union. But when it comes to how the bloc will respond, we can already tell you that in some cases you don't need all 27 member states to agree. A qualified majority is enough when it comes to responding.
Yeah.
So some economies are bigger than others, are more impacted than others. But I think that the feeling is Brussels, the European Union, wants to act as one in terms of trying to persuade the administration in Washington to perhaps reconsider and try and avoid escalating this to a trade war. Otherwise, it's a race to the bottom.
Right.
Really.
We've got one of our viewers asking a question here. I think it's interesting. Shouldn't the rest of the world just replace the missing market with each other's products and be way, way less affected than the U.S. itself? I mean, Steve, what do you think about that? Is that something that can even happen?
It's a great thought exercise, but just keep in mind how much is already built out around the U.S., right? How much capital other nations have sunk into the U.S., and how many supply lines are built there, how many markets are really, how many businesses are focused on those key markets. It's not going to be something that's replaced overnight.
Well, let's talk about like this here, an iPhone, for example. Let's say if you're in the United States and you want to buy an iPhone, that iPhone has been assembled probably in China, maybe Vietnam, but it has to come from outside the country. So if we're looking at the tariffs that are being put on China right now, taken together, 54% is the number. Is that going to mean a base model new iPhone, instead of costing you $500, $600, is going to cost you now $1,500?
It depends, again, on how much of this the manufacturers are going to swallow, the importers who are bringing that material back to the U.S., right? Yeah. There's going to be this dance about how much of that price hike they're going to eat and essentially take a haircut to retain market share in the U.S. And that's also what the Trump administration is betting on, and some of his economic advisors have been arguing as well, is that the right tariff can actually be relatively cost neutral to the American. Now, I would think that tariffs at this level are sort of beyond that at this point, because you're going to really wreck businesses or consumers, one or the other. So it's going to be pretty devastating. Remember that in 2018, 2019, or for the first round of these tariffs, countries, or businesses, I should say, did move to other countries. Vietnam really prospered during that time because manufacturers could invest there and get around some of those tariffs. It's not clear where you're going to go now. There's no easy answers.
Adrian Martinez is asking this question. Are tariffs also going to apply to the games we buy online from China?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I don't know, actually. And there's a lot that we don't know about what particular product and service codes are really going to be affected by this. And I think there's still a lot of answers we're waiting on. It may be out there, I don't know. But from what I can tell, a lot of this is dealing with goods in the first place. And then there are some exemptions, some of them being, for example, software, or I should say computer chips, for example, is one of the big ones that everyone's noted. We know that cars that are already hit by the 25% won't then be hit by another 20% if you're in the EU, for example. But in terms of services themselves, I don't know the answer to that.
Christine, let me ask you, in Washington, what do you say about that? I mean, it's going to get complicated, isn't it, determining where products come from, if components come from a certain part of the world? I mean, are we in a kind of a no-win situation here for the consumer?
The consumer can be facing a really complicated time, because figuring out what comes from where in our highly globalized economy is very complicated. And there are products that cross borders many times and are composed of components from many places. So who does it come from? Who owns it? What is the share of tariffs on it in the end? And that will require a lot of work and also friction within companies and within government to figure this out. This is generally not going to be good for the consumer. And on the one hand, there's a push for deregulation and simplification. And on the other hand, putting such complications in on the trade side is not going to allow for much economic growth and much development. And what we talked about on the European side, the need for growth and innovation and development in order to attain goals like defense spending right now, on the American side, too, there is a need for innovation and growth, in particular, because there's pressure to keep up with or to stay ahead of in certain areas of China. And how will that work when the ability to be active in a global world, how will it work to create new and exciting products when so much focus is on contraction, on protection, as opposed to creativity and innovation? And in the democratic world, the ability to share ideas and to cooperate internationally is a big driver for creativity and new ideas. And how is that going to affect the United States? On the European side, Europe also will need to think more creatively about innovation and how to make more money, how to drive more innovation, even in the defense space, and how that fuel the economy as well. And this current moment of thinking about restrictions, thinking about less, thinking about contraction and worry is not going to attain so many of the broader aims, which is why the philosophy here from the Trump administration can be really confusing. On the one hand, Trump wants America to be first, to outcompete, to lead, and yet the environment is one that looks much more at shutting down, hiding, worrying, rather than performing, certainly not in the short term and medium term.
Let me stay in Washington for just a second. We've got a question coming in from Gustavo Palos asking, isn't Trump also aiming to use these tariffs as a bargaining chip in negotiations? We're seeing lower tariffs or none on countries such as the UK, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. Christine, is that what it is? I mean, at the end of the day, is the art of the deal that we're seeing with these tariffs?
The tariffs are many things. Yes, they're also ways to have preference and to have benefit to friends and to those from whom something is expected, like Russia, in the short term. But it's not just about friendship, and it isn't just about a transactional relationship. Some of these tariffs perhaps could be lowered and negotiated away. And of course, it's incumbent on Europe right now to figure out a good package to have some easing of this burden. And yet the principle of tariffs is not just to negotiate, but also to drive this reindustrialization of the United States. So it's not entirely transactional. And that is perhaps some of the difference that we're seeing between the first Trump administration, when the Europeans and many around the world felt that there was a good deal to be made on a transactional level, and the second Trump administration, which both values that transactional relationship, the personality-driven politics between friendly European leaders and the White House, but also these broader, almost civilizational aims. What is the United States? What is the future of its industry? How are those who have been falling behind in American society, how do they rise again? And that's what the tariffs are for. So it's not something that can be as easily wiped away or negotiated away as perhaps it could have been in the first Trump term.
Yeah, since we're talking about negotiating, Stephen, let me ask you, we have a viewer posing the question, what concessions can realistically be made in negotiations with the U.S. given the formula that they are using to calculate the tariff rate?
And again, this is really based on the trade deficit and how much other nations are buying from the U.S. This is a really good point that this viewer is making right now, which is, again, it goes back to the fact that this is not about tariff levels, but about the actual amount of imports into these other nations. So the concessions that could be made, if we look back to 2018, 2019, during Trump 1 and the tariffs that happened then, we know that China eventually agreed to buy a certain amount of products from the U.S., agricultural products in particular. Enforcing that at the end of the day was actually pretty hard. But it was a headline win for Trump that he had forced China to do something about this trade deficit. Now, of course, as we know, the trade deficit has only ballooned since then. But it's a headline win for him, which, as we know, for Trump is often more important than a lot of the underlying facts when we look at his past policies. So I would imagine that that's one possibility, is that he's going to look for these kinds of purchase agreements. In terms of other concessions, what I find really interesting when you look at the EU, for example, tariffs are really only a part of the trade with the EU that bothers the U.S. Really what it is a lot of product standards, differences in product standards that make trade that much more difficult. When you look at things in the U.S. like beef hormones that are used, when you look at other chemicals that may be allowed there but not in the EU, when you look at regulations across the EU that U.S. products have to conform to, that also interrupts a lot of trade. That is the argument of the Trump administration. And so are there going to be any concessions on that level? Good luck, because a lot of those are very popular with Europeans. So
exactly, and the EU is still the world's largest market. I mean, is this a time when they could use that leverage of being the big market to maybe impose some standardization on the United States?
I mean, the U.S. would say that they're already trying to impose standardization on the U.S. They also have a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is a lengthy way of saying that in 2026, they're going to start taxing steel that's dirty with carbon, that's not green steel, based on the amount of carbon that went into production. This affects not just the U.S., but other countries. They're already raising a riot about this, or basically letting capitals know that they're not happy about this. There's also other measures that have been passed recently, including measures that aim to stop deforestation in the homelands of countries that are exporting into the EU. So the EU has been actually trying to to put more regulations out there into the global market that trading nations have to adhere to. And it's not only the U.S. that's actually upset over this. When you look at the deforestation issues, nations like Indonesia, Brazil have also said it's very hard to enforce these issues. So there obviously is a lot of trade friction already, and the EU does already set a lot of standards. And as we can see, that has created some friction. And again, the U.S. isn't alone.
Before I want to go back to the topic of what the EU is going to do moving forward. But first, we've got this question coming in from Nilay Chaturvedi asking, will these tariffs and other measures, hasn't the EU or the U.S. made the World Trade Organization redundant? And how will this impact global trade? What do you say, Stephen?
Yeah, the WTO is on a bit of a freeze right now because of an issue with the appellate body there that oversees a lot of these disputes. What was the second part of the question in terms of what does it mean for global trade? Yeah, I mean, that's a big picture question. And I think you see that in a lot of the headlines right now and a lot of the way this is being interpreted as this is trying to kill globalization. It's something that has, no matter what Trump says, and one of the sound bites we heard earlier, it has made the U.S. more prosperous. The question is whether, as Christine in Washington pointed out, whether that's been equally shared across the U.S. and everyone feels they have a stake in that prosperity. We've seen certain regions fall. We've seen manufacturing go away, certain levels of manufacturing. So yeah, this is an attempt to reorganize the global trade order that the U.S. put in place and other administrations thought was to its advantage. This is a completely different interpretation of what is to the U.S.'s advantage and what isn't.
Are we returning to a pre-WTO world? I mean, that's a question also that Nilay Chaturvedi is asking.
We're definitely returning to a world in which international cooperation led by the U.S. is falling away.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let me go to Brussels. Christine, I want to ask you, is Donald Trump, without knowing this, is he actually going to force the EU and China to come closer together? Is this going to be the end of de-risking that we've heard so much about in the last couple of years?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think there is also the sense in Europe that Europe was becoming far too dependent on China. And there was a need to see China as a competitor and to position yourself in a way where you're not too dependent on China. So I don't think that there would be a lot of people in support of the idea of increasing Europe's dependence on China. There are fears about, what were to happen if China were to, pursue its ambitions with Taiwan, and then you've got all this trade redirected in that direction, only to have that upended. I think there is still a lot of trauma here after what happened with the war in Ukraine and how Europe had to quickly move away from Russian gas. So I think there will be a lot of people who've said, I told you so in the past, who would be reminding people of previous mistakes that have been made. So I don't think it's as simple as that. These trade agreements take a very, very long time to renegotiate. And I know a few people have asked the question about why not simply just ditch the United States and pursue other avenues. I think we've got to understand that you cannot simply get around the United States because of the sheer size of that economy. It is so important for so many countries around the world, hence the impact that these tariffs are having. So it would be a very difficult thing, and that is why still here in the European Union, leaders are still expressing their preference for a negotiated solution. You heard the German finance minister who talked to Deutsche Welle yesterday, DW was on DW, talking about, well, why don't we just remove all tariffs? Why don't we just go to zero tariffs? Because that's better for everybody, because in an escalating trade conflict, there are no winners. And some are more losers than others are. So it's a very good question, Brent, but I think just given the previous experience with what's happened with Russia and the dependence on Russian energy, et cetera, I think it's not a quick and easy solution to say we just pivot and head east and look to the market in China.
I want to pick up on that and go to Washington. Christine, let me ask you, is that what the goal here is or should be, to go to a world with zero tariffs, or is that just wishful thinking?
I think that is wishful thinking with this administration. There are various economic roles for tariffs, but what the Trump administration clearly is using tariffs for is a lot of politicking and interpersonal relationship management. Maybe that wasn't exactly the point of tariffs previously, but for the next 3 years and 9 months, that is going to have to be a reality that the world will deal with. A much more free trade universe, a reduction of trade restrictions, isn't likely to happen because tariffs are a very blunt instrument that, as of right now, is still an instrument that President Trump can use to push various policy issues, whether that is a ceasefire in Ukraine or whether that is a border issue with Canada or Mexico. Tariffs are a preferred method for handling the widest range of policy challenges. And the economic effects of the tariffs can matter and cannot matter depending on the situation at hand. This is challenging, and Congress today in particular finds this really disruptive and outside of the powers that the administration should have. And so we've seen from the Senate side a move to restrict the Trump administration's ability to impose tariffs and instead to require Congress to provide permission within 60 days of a tariff being proposed. Now, this has a good chance of success in the Senate, but doesn't look like it will be successful in the House thus far. But it is one sign that even the Senate Republicans are getting frustrated with their lack of agency and the lack of say that Congress has on foreign policy, including on tariffs and on economic policy. And it's a good bet that if economic conditions worsen in the United States, Congress is going to become far more vocal and seek other ways of restricting Trump's freedom on these policies. But where we stand right now, there's no expectation that the use of tariffs for a wide range of politics will end.
Okay, we're coming up in the last couple of minutes. I'm going to pose a question, let all of my guests answer it. Let me start with you, Stephen. Final question. Are we headed towards the largest trade war that the world has ever seen? Is that where we're headed?
I mean, you could say so, since we're coming off an era of globalization in which there's more world trade than we've ever seen before. This era has been defined by a level of global trade that never existed before. At this level, at this volume, at this dollar amount. So if everything's going to get jammed up, if there's going to be barriers erected and then trade routes are going to start going elsewhere, what's China going to do with its goods? Is it going to try and dump it in the EU? Is the EU going to put tariffs then on China? You're going to have kind of a domino effect. That's the fear, right? So I would say, yeah, I think this is going to be the biggest trade war we've seen.
Let me go to Brussels. Christine, what do you say? Where are we headed?
Well, there are certainly fears of that. And so you have a lot of people on this side of the world urging policymakers in the European Union to try and avoid that. Like I said, there is the feeling here, and I think everybody can agree that there are no winners, but some do stand to lose more than others. So there is the feeling that there has to be some kind of a negotiated settlement, because if this escalates, this will be very bad for absolutely everybody.
And I'll go to Washington. Christine, we've got 20 seconds. What's your answer? Trade war or not?
Trade war, but it's up to the non-Washington parts of the world to buddy up to take down those tensions and find a more collaborative approach for dealing with Washington.
All right. Well, this is our special Ask DW. I want to thank all our guests. Christine Brezina in Washington, Christine Mundwa in Brussels. And here in the studio with me, Stephen Beardsley. To all of you, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of you for watching us, streaming us, and thank you for being a part of the conversation. The world and the Trump tariffs. You can get more news and analysis on our social media channels at DW News. And you can stay up to date with our DW News app. And stay with us. I'll be back in 75 minutes with more world news followed by the day. Hope to see you then. Thanks for watching.